Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're taking a look at Miriam and her horse Lady. Now, Miriam's had some difficulties with this horse and trying to get started with these Art to Ride concepts here. And she's keeping the horse mainly in a walk, which is a good idea at this point. This horse was, I guess, quite fractious and rears a lot, which we will see as we go on here, a little bit of that. But she says she's turning the corner and coming around and getting much calmer and happier in the work, so that's all a good thing, and that's what usually happens with this type of work. So starting out here in the walk, this is really pretty good. She's stretching down pretty nicely. I'd like to see the walk maybe a little more active. But the fact that she's stretching down, and for a horse like this, who's been hyper energetic, so to speak, she said this kind of horse that will just run and run and run and run on the lunge line. And unfortunately, those kind of horses have kind of been taught that by somebody along the way. So we have to just go back and kind of start all over again. And you're doing just the right thing with this one. Very many times when horses have that kind of nonstop run thing in them, they're way too hyper fit. And what we have to do in the beginning is just let those horses lose a lot of that fitness. So just staying, and of course that's aerobic fitness we're talking about, where the horse can just go and go and go. Remember that horses can be fit aerobically and go for miles and miles and miles and miles without tiring, but yet still be completely hollow, which is of course what destroys them. So the important thing with a horse like this is to do just what you've done. Go back to the beginning and just start off with a walk and let the horse lose some of that hyper aerobic fitness and begin to just relax and get a little lazy with those kind of horses, what we want. But this is all really good here. She's stretching down really nicely in the walk. And now that she's stretched down there a little further, that's much improved. She's starting to swing a little better. So just working to get that little more swing out of the horse a little bit. But you're doing a very good job with that. And I think this horse will just continue to turn around for you. That is, to turn around and get better. Of course, I mean, not turn around and flip around like she does in a little while. She tries to rear a little bit. And actually, when we get to that, you handle that exactly right. Just don't make a big deal of it. If you're good enough when a horse flips on you, you can run the lash out and just tap them on the shoulder, and that will quickly turn them around. That is the inside shoulder, so they keep going. But you have to be very good with a lunge whip to be able to do that. If not, and you don't have a lot of experience, you're better off just doing what you did there. Just take it quietly, get behind her, and send her on again. But we'll see that in a moment. But this walk work is looking really good. She goes into a little trot, no big deal. She comes right back to the walk. Now you could see how short that trot was when she did trot. It was a very sort of hollow and tense, kind of little short, choppy trot, which of course is never what we're looking for. But I think you're very much on track here with this horse. She looks like he's calming down. And even before lunging, folks, if you have a horse that's just, has learned this running thing on the lunge line, you may want to just walk with them. That is, just lead them just like you normally would alongside the shoulder. And just take them for long walks. If you can't, if the lunge line triggers this response to run, now you've obviously gotten beyond that, so that's all good. But if you did have a horse that you couldn't get to stop doing that, I would highly recommend just walking it next to it. That is, just walking it like you're just leading it someplace and do a lot of that, and then try to transfer that onto the lunge line once you get them used to just coming out and walking. But it looks like you've gotten well beyond that now, and the horse is really starting to stretch down nicely. Once again, it's a little slow at this point here. We'd like to see a little more swing in the walk. And that's perfectly normal, when we have to move on a little bit. Horses normally want to just go right into the trot and give you a lazy trot rather than a long swinging walk. So what you're doing here is just exactly right. Just bring the horse right back to the walk again. Now that looks really nice. Now notice how much deeper the horse steps. As soon as that neck goes down, we see the horse beginning to overreach the step of the front feet. Many people today think that their horses are not good movers, because they've gone to dressage lessons where people have tried to crank them into a frame. And of course, when you do that, when the back is hollow, the back end will never come through. So they get this kind of stiff kind of movement in the hocks. And that's exactly what many of the upper level riders are doing today. But they have these horses with amazing, huge movement. So when they shorten them all down and hollow their backs, it still looks like something to somebody who doesn't know what they're looking at. And of course, sadly, that's been the downfall of so many horses, because the good movers all get immediately shoved into a terrible frame because they have so much movement that it still looks like something. That is, the hocks keep moving. But if they actually got their horses over their back and developed them correctly, how much more movement they would actually have, and correct movement, instead of this phony kind of shooting the front legs out from the shoulders. Remember, that happens because people brace the necks back against the top of the shoulder, so that makes the bottom of the shoulder kind of free. So we kind of end up with that shooting the cuffs kind of extended trot that we see in so many horses today. that is so damaging to their legs. That is, the hind legs don't come through, but the shoulders come, but the horse throws its front legs out from the shoulders, which is exactly what saddlebreds do. And that's the real sad thing, and what's happened here, is that people have just continued to go down this downward spiral of dressage just becoming about who has the best moving horse, no matter how upside down it is, and who spent the most money. And here she canters a little bit. Not bad, and that's not an out of control canter, so I don't mind a little bit of that. She's not running on that. And she actually came down to a pretty good trot there. I would have been curious to see what she would have done. This horse certainly looks to me like it's ready to start trotting, and when you get a little trot, she's a little hollow in it, but she's not, just running away wildly. So you probably are ready to do much more trot with this horse now. And if you find that the horse is running wildly, just keep bringing the horse into a smaller circle till it literally can't run around. Now, little horses can run around you quite fast, even on a 3-meter circle, but eventually they will slow down. That's why we want to use the circle whenever we lunge to control the horse's speed instead of yanking on the rein. If we just bring them into a small enough circle, they'll start to slow down. And as soon as they respond to that, you just let them back out in the larger circle again. That's really all there is to it. Once you understand a few of these basic principles about lunging, it all comes very, very quickly. But I always tell everyone, the real key to lunging is learning how to use the whip correctly. So I highly recommend that if you're wanting to learn how to do this, that you practice with the whip somewhere away from horses. Put a target on the wall, say about at the level of where the horse's hindquarters would be, or on its side, so maybe like 3.5, 4 feet up, and just try to use both hands and just tap. Begin to learn to place the whip where you want it. I was fortunate enough when I was about 19 to meet a man who had just retired, who was the trainer for the Barnum and Bailey Circus for all their horses. And I saw him, he happened to move his horse to where I was, and I saw him lunging this horse, and it was just beautiful. I had never seen anybody lunge a horse like that. So, of course, I immediately went over to talk to him and find out what he was all about, and he was happy to share his knowledge with me, which is one of those lucky kind of moments that you fall into. As they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, he did, and it really helped me. He used to say, he'd hold his whip and say, the horse is my easel, and this is my paintbrush, meaning the whip. He could tap it wherever he needed the horse just to add that little touch. So getting good with the whip is a very important skill. So changing directions here, you see she kind of looks to the outside, which makes me think she's thinking about spinning around on you, but she doesn't do it there. So we can see here in this circle, so much more than the other side, this horse is much more counterflex to the outside in this direction. Wants to keep the shoulder way outside the track of the hind legs. So this is where we just have to keep working to get the hindquarters pushed out. We want always the horse to, at least both ends of the horse, to be on the same circle. And then later on, we can learn to do a little shoulder in on the lunge line, but pushing the hindquarters a little bit more away when we want to ask for a little more engagement to the back. Once again, coming around the corner there, you can see how counterflex she is. But I certainly think this horse is ready to start doing some trotting from what I see here. And even the canter wasn't bad. That little bit of canter that you got was not running away, and actually it was pretty nice. So just asking for very short periods of both of those things, trot and canter, are a good thing to do. Just don't keep doing them. There we see when you're trying to get a little more active walk, which you do get, and that's very normal for the horse to want to go into a little bit of a trot, even when we ride. It's the same kind of thing. We ask for more engagement. They think, oh, they want us to run forward. Remember, most people today think forward means to run forward as fast as you can go. Nothing could be further from the truth. Forward means to engage forward under the body. That's what going forward means. Good stretch and good activity now again in the walk. Not quite as low as she was on the other side at certain times, but it's getting there. And thinking sure she wants to trot a little bit. And here you get your little bit of canter. And that's perfectly all right. Counter-cantering there, but you do the right thing. Just don't make a big deal of it and just ask the horse back. So in the beginning, the first thing we do with these kind of horses that want to run is just simply keep them in a single gait. Don't try to make anything too complicated. In this horse's case, it's walk. Now that's really good. Now notice how much better the horse moves when she gets to that. You can almost see the back undulating from side to side once she gets the head down in that position that allows that to happen. And she canters off again, no big deal. Certainly not wildly. But that's very normal, as I said, when horses want to, when we try to get them to engage a little more, they'd rather do the easier thing of going into a very trotty little trot kind of thing, a hollow trot. But I love how you're staying very calm in all of this, not over pressurizing the horse. And as I said, that's not a terribly out of control canter, so I don't mind a little bit of that. You know, we always have to compromise with horses when we work horses. So once in a while, if we have to let them, you know, if this horse needs a little bit of canter before it's going to have a good walk, well, then let it have. As long as it's not completely out of control, that's okay. But now we come back to a better trot, and she's even starting to stretch into the trot here. So this is really good. Look how she's immediately going down into the stretch. So that tells me that you've done plenty of work in the walk, and she's really ready to move on. And once again, even that little bit of canter you're getting is not terribly out of control. Don't mind that. She comes back into a little more active trot. Main thing is that we just don't let the horse run around and around and around us in the canter. If that starts to happen, all you'd want to do is just bring the horse into a smaller circle till it drops back in the trot. As soon as it does, then you let it back out again. In other words, the way we work here, the reward is always rewarding the horse when it goes into a better frame, as opposed to punishing it for doing something wrong. We want to just reward the good work. Horses are trying to find their way at all times, you know, just like any other student learning anything. You know, and sometimes, you know, like the kid in math, you know, if you don't learn 2 plus 2 and you try to move on to division, it's going to be confusing for you. So just like that, whether you're a horse or a person, you need to, when we're talking about something that is very complicated, we have to learn it in very small steps, that we learn the steps step by step, and the first step that lets you understand the next step. As I said, just like if you tried to learn calculus before you had tried to, you know, even learn your pluses and your minuses, well, you'd have a hard time understanding it, wouldn't you? You'd probably be totally confused and give up on the whole process. Well, horses are the same way. When we make it too complicated or physically too difficult for them, they just either shut off on us. If they're the kind of horse that's quiet to begin with, they'll just kind of shut off and get dull. And if they're excitable horses, they'll just get more excited. We want all horses to sort of end up at the same place in the middle, where they have some energy. They move lightly off your leg with plenty of energy, but aren't running away. So we want to end up at that same place with both of them, though we have to take a little different approach to each kind of horse. With this one, as you said, who was quite fractious in the beginning and all she wanted to do is run, then we have to get these kind of horses a little bit lazy and work on kind of letting them down, so to speak, in their level of fitness. If your horse has any kind of thoroughbred in it at all, or Arab would be the same difference. You know, these horses get aerobically fit very fast. If you've ever seen horses trained at the racetrack, it takes 10 or 15 minutes and they're done. All they do is trot around one way, and then they turn around the other way, and they do a little breeze most days, and once a week they open them up a little bit, and that's all there is to it. And you look at how fit those horses are. So thoroughbreds get very fit very fast. You know, people used to always talk about the crazy thoroughbreds off the track. Well, they can't be that crazy because a little 98-pound man gets on them and, you know, gallops them out of a little box without bucking, and they go down the road. But what people do when they get these horses home is that, they usually start lunging because they think the horse is high, but of course they don't realize if you lunge a thoroughbred horse for an hour, pretty soon you'll be lunging it for 4 hours before it will calm down. So if you're only lunging to get a horse to, in other words, to wear it out so that you can do something with it. Really good walk here. This is starting to stretch really deep into it again. A little bit slow there, but I'd rather have a little slow and relaxed than too fast. So I thought that was a really good workout on that side. You did just the right thing when she cantered and took off, and you had a little bit of really good trot there. So I certainly think this horse is ready to trot. From what I saw there, she pretty much went right into a stretch. So good work there. So once again, then you'd want to go back the next day when you, after watching this, and just start doing your walk work first and then going into the trot and just working the trot just the way you work the walk. Even in the walk there, she broke on you a couple of times and you had to bring her back, and you did quietly, and that's all there is to it. You know, when I lunge, I try to think in my mind that I'm actually driving a horse in a cart. You think about that, because if you have a horse in a cart, and if you've ever done any driving, driving is probably the most dangerous kind of horse work you can do, because if something goes wrong and you get caught up in all those lines and in the cart and all the rest of it, you're going to be in big, big, big trouble. So I always think that I never want to let my horses get too out of control. I watch them very carefully, try to keep them from exploding, keep them from running, keep them under control and quiet. As I said, just like I would if I were driving a cart. I had the experience once for a man that I trained for. He had the world's champion Arab driving horse, and he wanted me to drive it, and I arrived at the track where he had the horse, and once again, the lesson about checking your tack before you get on. Never trust anybody. Really good stretch here in the trot. Now that's starting to move really nicely there as it starts to get a little deeper in the stretch. And here she goes a little more into a canter, and once again shaking her head a little bit. No big deal. She's not running too wildly. This is where she does a little rear up and flips on you. Now, if you were very good right there, I guess that wasn't the rear, but it's coming up here pretty soon. You did just the right thing to just quietly turn her back in the other direction and keep her going. And right back into the walk. She's a little distracted, trying to look at something off in the field. But you're doing a good job there. That's the right thing to do, to keep her on a little smaller circle when she does that. But just don't make a little deal of it. As she said, someone taught this horse to actually rear. So that's something that you would definitely want to stay away from. And that's just the right thing. Just start her out again, not making a big deal of it. Now, as I said, if you were very good with your whip, when she started to flip on you, you could run the whip out and tap the horse on the inside of the shoulder there to send it on around. But that's not something you want to try unless you are very, very good with the whip. So as I was saying there in my little story, I arrived and got on. She's going to give you that little bucking. And that's no big deal. She's just trying to express that thing. You're doing just the right thing. Calm it down again. Obviously, old habits die hard. So we're seeing the horse is quite different on this side than on the other side. And horses can be very much that way. What you have to remember about horses is that their eyes, the reason we have to train them in both directions, is that their right eye goes to the left brain and the left eye goes to the right brain. There's no crossover. So literally a horse has to see everything with either eye. And this is just the right thing you're doing here. Don't make a big deal of this. Also, don't let her charge off. And just start her again. Now, once again, as I said, if you had enough skill with the whip, what I would do right there is run it off and tap the horse on the right shoulder and set it on around. But that's perfectly fine the way you're going about it, because I wouldn't want you to try tapping her on the shoulder, because I think you'd probably get more than you wanted or could deal with. But that's just the right thing to do, is just calmly come back and start again. As you've already realized that the horse will get better and better and accept all this work more and more, once it realizes that you're just doing this very consistent. That's the biggest problem with most people's approach to training horses, that they're just not consistent in what they do. There's no foundation. They don't build on a foundation. They just come out, and I've heard so many people, I've heard so many trainers come out and go, okay, well, what do you want to work on today? Well, the trainer is the one who should be deciding what people work on. You must work on things that are within the scope that the horse can do. So someone walks in on a hollow back horse and says they want to work on flying changes. Well, what I would say to them is, well, you got to get this horse working correctly before you can think about doing flying changes. So instead of just going about trying to do something that the horse is ill prepared to do, always remembering that most resistances come when people are asking for things that the horse is not capable of doing. Now, to finish my little story before I was telling you, so I get in this cart and drive away, and I come to the first corner and try to slow down, and the cart runs into the back of the horse, and the horse bolts. And I realized that right away that what happened here is the man who tacked up this horse, who owned it, forgot to put the strap around the back of the legs that keeps the cart from running into the horse. So every time I tried to stop, the cart ran into the horse, and the horse bolted like a maniac, and finally came around a corner going as flat out as it could possibly go, and the cart flipped and threw me about 30 feet in the air. And fortunately, I was not damaged, other than a few bumps and bruises, but it could have been a very, very, very nasty accident that could have caused me great bodily harm had I got caught up, and then the horse continued to drag that cart until it was completely destroyed, which it would have done to you had you been hooked up in it. So once again, the moral of that story is always check your tack if someone else tacked up your horse for you, whether it's a saddle or a cart or whatever the case may be. Always check it. Never assume that everyone has done everything correctly, because it's your life at stake once you climb into that cart or climb on the back of the horse. It was always the rider's responsibility at the last moment before they get up to check everything, that everything's been done right if they didn't do it themselves. And even a double check is not a bad idea, because even we all make little mistakes every now and then in going too fast. Now, do be careful about letting the horse get too straight in front of you like that. You always want to kind of keep it on that circle, because if you do have a horse like this that's been a little excitable, it may very well decide to just take off. And if you're straight behind it, it'll pull you right off of your feet, because it can really get some speed up going in a straight line. But all of this is really quite good. I'm not seeing anything, you're handling everything exactly as you should, just keeping the horse calm and going back to what you're doing, starting again. And pretty soon this horse will forget about all that rearing stuff if you just continue, as it already has to a great degree. So you've already gotten really good work in the walk, and that's coming really consistently. So I certainly think you're ready to start doing the trot work, as long as the horse stays in the stretch. Now, in the beginning, they always come up and down a little bit when we first start, or there might be something more distracting in the ring with the baby, in which case we have to just wait it out a little bit, do a little more walk work. Try to always be sure the horse is completely calm in the walk. That was the one thing that Mr. Oliveira always insisted upon. You would never see him go into a trot with a horse until it was completely calm in the walk and working over its back. Once you realize that, every step you take with a horse hollow is basically damaging the body of the horse in one way or another, as getting the horse over the back is what puts the shock absorbers on the horse so that the horse doesn't take up all that concussion of movement into the hard tissue. So always remember that. So if you start hollowing start cantering a hollow backed horse, you can just imagine the faster the horse goes at a full gallop, it's something like 5,000 pounds of pressure per square inch on the horse's front feet. So it's a lot of damage done if the horse isn't working over the back, so it's not hitting the ground so hard. Now this is coming once again really quite nicely here, trying to stretch into the contact a little bit. And you don't always want to come back. I'm not sure that last trot was your idea or the horse's idea, but once it is your idea, once they get going, don't immediately come back to the walk if they're upside down. Just give them a few circles. Now, if they don't start to stretch into the contact within a few circles, a few minutes, then you want to just come right back to the walk and reestablish that again. Don't let the horse ever start racing. So you're doing just the right thing here. But don't just pull the horse right back to the walk again just because it starts off a little upside down. The transitions are always a little difficult at first. So, if you can't get it, just begin to stretch down in 3 or 4 circles, then you just want to come back to the walk and reestablish it there. Really good here. Could be a little more swing in it, but once again, I'd rather the horse be relaxed and stretched than have a giant walk. So we're always looking for the biggest, most ground-covering gait, whatever it is, trot or canter, that we can have in the beginning with the horse over its back. Then when we get real collection, once again, remember that collection is not shortening the gaits, and that's the biggest mistake we see in almost everywhere that I look, is people think collection is pulling the horse back into itself and somehow compressing the horse's body. That isn't what collection is at all. Collection is once the horse can get over its back, is the degree to which it can bend the 3 joints of the hind leg, and by virtue of that, thrust more actively up into the horse's back, which can only happen if the horse is round. Then that thrust lifts the front end off the ground. So in other words, what we lose in forward motion, we gain in lift, as opposed to just, once again, pulling the horse into a shortened frame, or even shortening it. I see a lot of these Western guys, for instance, who ride, they're not touching the mouth of the horse, but the horses aren't round either. So yes, you're better off riding around a horse on a loose rein, than you are having one tight in the contact. But on the other hand, just because a horse is, even with his neck on the ground, as we see with many Western riders, they're not coming through behind. They're still in this phony kind of trotty trot. So they never really develop, a real top line and get in working gaits. Remember, it's not in a working gait if the horse is not working over its back. That's what the old masters meant, and why they differentiated between a working trot and just a trot. Meaning a trot in any old way the horse can do it, which usually means disconnected. Good stretch here. Once again, being careful not to get too far behind the horse. Always staying at the apex of that triangle created by the line in your right hand in this case and the whip in your left hand. You should be at the apex of a triangle. Now you can see here that once again the hindquarters are a little bit to the inside, so we'd want to get them to send out just a little bit more than that when possible. But I certainly think you're right on track with everything I've seen here. I'm not seeing any problems. This horse is calming down quite nicely. You're dealing with all of its difficulties in just the right way by not getting excited, not trying to punish the horse. Just start again. You know, if you start punishing a horse that's doing the kind of things this horse is doing, it will only get excited. That's the thing with, you know, you can't get away when horses are sensitive. You can't get away with this kind of beating on them that we see so many people in dressage doing. It's also why we're starting to see a lot of these giveaway horses, because they're breeding a lot more hotness into the warm bloods. So these trainers and people who've been riding what we call kind of dumb bloods, these kind of horses that you can kick and pound, you know, they can get away with anything on. But you get a little more blood in them, they will not stand for that. I mean, a thoroughbred horse will kill you before it will throw itself on the ground or you into a tree or whatever the case may be, you know, before it will let you subjugate it in most cases in the kind of way that we see being done to a lot of these duller warm bloods. And just remember that saddlebreds and Tennessee walking horses also are very, very, very calm horses. People see them out there and they look so flashy, but if you saw how they train them, they have to just continuously soar their feet. They're shaking things at them, blowing fire extinguishers at them. I was at a barn where a trainer was having kids blow Roman candles at another kid on the back of a horse to excite the horses. So only these very dull horses will put up with the kind of things that we see, these abusive methods being worked on. You know, it absolutely appalls me, you know, that saddlebreds are still in our American Horse Show Association, or the United States Equestrian Federation, as they now call themselves. So they have a fancier name for themselves, but everything has gone down the hill. You know, all of the horse sports. You go to Western show, the horses are all limping around. They look like they're half lame and half dead. All the things that are done to them just to win a ribbon, and we've seen all of that just go into the dressage. You know, dressage world used to be inhabited by the people who really cared about horses, that really wanted to go to another level, you know, of understanding with the horse and development. But today it's all been dumbed down. Young horses are horribly forced into terrible frames from the very beginning. When they're 3 years old, we see these 100-day tests, which do more damage to horses than any. I mean, the idea of taking these babies and doing these, you know, a couple of months of training and expecting them to jump around a 4-foot course and all the crazy stuff they do, and force them into these frames where they're, you know, trying to look like Grand Prix horses, but they are not. So I think you are on the right track here to getting all this going very, very well. Just keep up what you're doing. Now start adding more trot. This horse really looks like it's capable of trotting now to me. You had a little trot there that she did by accident that was really very good. She stretched right down in the contact. So just like you did in the canter, if she starts to run, you just bring her into a smaller circle till it drops back into a walk, and then let them right back out again, and go back to the walk work until the horse is completely relaxed, and then try the trot again. In other words, we never want to get in the habit of trying to just using lunging to wear horses out. When we do that, they just become more and more difficult. And unfortunately, today, horses that, because they have been strict about drugging horses a little bit, so now what the people are doing is they're bleeding them. You know, they're literally taking blood out of them to calm them down. Everything you can name under the sun. They've got lots of drugs that people, you know, can't detect any longer. It's just so much easier and so much safer, you know, to actually train a horse correctly. And the idea to me that I see happening today in many riding schools is kids being put on drugged horses. Well, what happens when the groom drugs the horse a little bit too much and it falls on its head and rolls over on top of the kid? Well, this is happening. These kind of things are happening all the time because we've allowed, you know, all of this kind of abusive training to come into the thing, and shortcuts that they can take. Instead of having to work the horse themselves to get it ready for the student, it's easier to just give them a shot of ace promazine and away they go. Well, that is a terrible precedent to set and terribly dangerous. So you're doing a great job here. Keep up the good work. You're ready to trot. I look forward to your next submission, seeing a little more trot work. Once again, if the horse breaks into the canter, even when it did it, was not terrible and was not just a running wildly upside down. Wasn't great, but it wasn't anything too particularly dangerous or anything. So once again, no big deal on that. You're going to have to push them a little bit. Once in a while, they're going to break into another gate, and just bring them calmly back, just what you've done. So just the way you handled the rearing and all that was just the way I would want you to do it. Just keep it calm and just start again. Good walk in the stretch here. I think you're well on your way. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. I look forward to the future development of this horse. think it will turn into a lovely animal for you. So keep me posted. Look forward to seeing you next time. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride.